This series begins by showing the atmosphere in an interrogation room located in New York City in 1955, where two brothers being interrogated by the police because they were caught stealing. Knowing that they had committed a criminal act, the youngest brother, Winston, appeared to regret his actions while crying because he was afraid he would be thrown into prison. However, his older brother, Frankie, tried to reassure Winston by telling him that Winston would not go to jail because he would take the blame for everything. Frankie also instructed Winston to remain silent and not say anything to the police because Frankie intended to confess as the sole perpetrator of the theft. Several years later, Frankie, who is now an adult, is seen attending a New Year's Eve party at the Continental Hotel, which is held in a festive atmosphere. Most of the guests at the party know Frankie and greet him as he walks through the hall to enjoy the party. Frankie then approached a table and greeted a middle-aged man named Cormick, who was the manager of the Continental Hotel in New York City. Cormick then stood up to welcome Frankie and introduced him to his party guests, telling them that he picked up Frankie from the streets when he was a child and trained him to become the strong man he is now. Cormick then gave Frankie a glass of alcohol and invited him to toast. Although Frankie appeared to drink the beverage to honor Cormick, who had invited him to toast, when he had walked away from Cormick and his guests, he then spat out the drink and left the party. Frankie then went to the subway station and prepared to carry out his plan to rob the safe of the Continental Hotel, while people were busy celebrating the New Year's Eve. After successfully breaking into the safe door, Frankie and his accomplice named Razzo entered the safe that filled with gold and cash. Unlike Razzo, who seemed very impressed with the contents of the safe, Frankie was not interested in such things at all because he had another target stored in the safe. Frankie then opened a box and found a gold coin printing machine, which was his target. But unexpectedly, Razzo also wanted the object, so he pointed his weapon at Frankie, telling him to hand over the object. However, Frankie quickly attacked Razzo, which immediately made Razzo fire several shots and attracting the attention of the guests who were partying at the hotel. Knowing that the gunshot sound came from the vault room, Cormick's subordinates hurriedly went there and caught Frankie trying to take away the gold coin printing machine. Frankie had anticipated his plan would be discovered, so he grabbed his weapon and engaged in a fierce shootout against Cormick's men while looking for a way out of the hotel. With his fighting skills and proficiency in using firearms, Frankie easily defeated Cormick's men and managed to escape by jumping out of a window on the upper floor. Landing in a pile of garbage, Frankie was picked up by his wife, Yin, who arrived in a taxi, and they quickly left the Continental Hotel. Meanwhile, in London, Winston, who is now an adult, is seen trying to persuade a wealthy old man named Mr. Davenport to invest in a large-scale parking lot project he plans to build in London. But Davenport seems reluctant to invest a large amount of his money in Winston because he is unfamiliar with Winston, who is a businessman from an unnamed small firm. Additionally, his wife Rosalind also disagrees with Davenport investing their money in a parking lot project she believes is not profitable, while boasting to Winston that the Davenport family is a wealthy family with many influential connections in society, so they are not interested in doing business with ordinary people like Winston. Upon hearing this, Winston then called a man and asked him to talk to Rosalind about himself. Surprisingly, the man Winston called turned out to be one of the acquaintances of the Davenport family and a respected figure in society, even respected by the Davenport family because of his wealth. Rosalind appeared surprised to learn that the man was Winston's biggest investor, and she called the Davenport family as a fools for refusing to invest and collaborate with Winston. After receiving confirmation that Winston is trustworthy, Davenport immediately instructed his wife to send money to Winston as they would start a business partnership with him. That evening, Rosalind visited Winston in his hotel room to inform him that Davenport had sent him money, while praising Winston for acting well to deceive Davenport. Winston and Rosalind were actually working together to deceive Davenport, and Rosalind's role was to lie to Davenport about their acquaintance being Winston's biggest investor, when in reality, the phone call was purely fictional. Rosalind then seduced Winston to sleep with her, and Winston immediately agrees. While Rosalind was taking a shower, Winston, who was fully dressed, suddenly became alert when he felt as if he was being watched. He then went outside the room to check, but surprisingly, he was attacked by 3 masked men who managed to sneak into his room. Winston tried to resist, but he soon became overwhelmed as they were able to corner him. At the same time, a female servant approached Winston's room while pulling out a syringe, and when Winston tried to escape, she immediately injected him to sedate him. Shortly afterward, the masked men took Winston away from the hotel by hiding him in a laundry cart and then putting him into a car. The following day, Cormick was seen interrogating his men because they failed to retrieve the stolen coin printer. Since the rules prohibited them from killing each other at the Continental, Cormick mentally intimidated them, which led one of his men to do the unthinkable, because Cormick threatened to kill his family if he didn't do that immediately. On the other hand, Winston finally woke up and found that he had been kidnapped. When a woman welcomed him in front of the building, Winston found that someone had jumped from the top floor of the building, indicating that Winston was taken to the Continental Hotel in New York City. Winston was then taken to meet Cormick in his office, where Cormick immediately asked Winston about the whereabouts of Frankie, as Winston is Frankie's brother. Cormick informed Winston that Frankie had stolen something very important, something that holds the entire establishment that wields power beyond his imagination. Although Cormick emphasized to Winston that Frankie had stolen something very important to some very dangerous people out there, Winston did not care at all and asserted to Cormick that he knew nothing about Frankie, and he also didn't care about his brother. Surprisingly, Cormick allowed Winston to leave and instructed his assistant, Sharon, to escort Winston to the elevator. As Sharon escorted Winston to the elevator, he told Winston that he was quite surprised to see someone speaking openly in front of his boss, because usually people were afraid of Cormick. Even though there were some who dared to defy Cormick, it could be guaranteed that they would be found dead or disappear without a trace. Sharon then offered Winston to join their institution, but Winston refused, and he then left the hotel. After Winston left, Cormick ordered one of his men to secretly tail Winston because he didn't trust Winston, who claimed to have cut ties with Frankie. Elsewhere, 3 gun runners were being threatened at with a gun by a man named Yuzen, who was their potential buyer. Yuzen then took a rifle and intended to kill one of the gun runners named Lou, because she had insulted him by calling him a little man unworthy of holding a rifle. However, when Yuzen pulled the trigger of the rifle, unexpectedly, the rifle turned against him, which was then used by Lou and her associates to fight back. They managed to defeat Yuzen's men and let Yuzen leave the place. At the same time, a female police detective named Katie was seen spying on Yuzen while taking some of his photos for investigative purposes. Katie then secretly followed Yuzen, who went to the Continental Hotel. Seeing Yuzen entering the hotel, Katie called his partner, Mayhew, and informed him about it. However, Mayhew immediately warned Katie to stay away from the Continental, but Katie had already left her car and walked towards the Continental. Knowing this, Mayhew hurriedly followed Katie, and he managed to arrive just before Katie entered the Continental. After that, Mayhew told Katie to get into the car immediately, ignoring Katie, who protested, thinking that Mayhew intended to hinder her investigation. Mayhew then took Katie to an alley, where he warned Katie not to deal with people who could easily enter the Continental Hotel. Upon hearing that, Katie immediately questioned Mayhew's reason for prohibiting her from investigating at the Continental. Katie then insisted that she had to enter the Continental because she needed to find clues about Frankie, who was suspected of supplying firearms traded illegally by Yuzen and his accomplices. However, Mayhew refused to explain anything to Katie, and he only emphasized to Katie to stay away from the Continental. That night, Winston went to see Charlie, a longtime friend, to ask about Frankie's whereabouts. At that moment, Charlie seemed delighted to meet Winston, because they hadn't seen each other for years since Winston moved to London. Charlie then informed Winston that Frankie might be hiding in Chinatown and showing him a brochure of Burton's karate dojo. Charlie added that Frankie had recently been involved in weapon smuggling activities and was still working for Cormick. At that moment, Winston informed Charlie that Frankie had stolen something important from Cormick, and Cormick had sent his men to kidnap him from London. Winston was reluctant to deal with Frankie again because Frankie decided to return to work for Cormick, a man who had ruined their lives and who had once thrown Frankie into prison. Nevertheless, Charlie told Winston that Frankie was his family and Winston should help him, just as he would help them if they needed assistance. Upon hearing that, Winston decided to find Frankie before Cormick found him. He then asked for a car, but Charlie didn't have a car, and he gave Winston a coat to keep him warm instead. However, Winston soon realized that Charlie was lying to him, so Charlie finally confessed that he did have a car, but he seemed reluctant to give it to Winston. In the end, Charlie gave the car he named Maria to Winston, warning him to guard the car with his life as it was his beloved car. Charlie also gave a weapon to Winston, and before leaving, Winston promised Charlie that he would protect the car with his life. Meanwhile, Lou and her brother, Miles, finally arrived at their residence in Chinatown, where Lou appeared annoyed with Miles because she was tired of helping Miles trade firearms illegally. Lou then instructed Miles to remove all the guns from their house, but Miles refused because the guns were their means of earning money. Miles added that Lou also had no other income to support them, and Lou still had to maintain their father's karate dojo because Lou had promised their father. Shortly after, Winston arrived at Burton's karate dojo, which turned out to be the dojo belonging to Lou and Miles's late father. Lou initially welcomed Winston because she thought he came to practice karate at the dojo. However, after she found out that Winston was Frankie's brother, Lou immediately drove him away, assuming that Winston would also bring trouble to her, just like Frankie. At the same time, they heard gunshots coming from the room behind them, so Winston drew his pistol and pointed it at Lou. But surprisingly, the gunshots didn't come from the room behind them, but from the basement beneath the dojo's floor. Lou then descended the stairs leading to the basement, while Winston followed her from behind, still holding his pistol pointed at Lou. At that moment, Winston encountered Lou's associate, Lemmy, who was holding a rifle, and he was the one who fired the shots to test the rifle. Knowing that Winston was distracted by seeing the weapons they possessed, Lou quickly used her combat skills to incapacitate Winston, while Miles and Lemmy pointed their guns at him. Lou then informed them that Winston was Frankie's brother and ordered them to take care of him as she walked away from there. Shortly after, Miles and Lemmy asked Winston to prove that he was indeed Frankie's brother, and Winston immediately told them Frankie's full name, which was only known by a few people. After confirming that Winston was indeed Frankie's brother, Lemmy then asked Winston about his purpose for visiting them. Winston told them that he needed to find Frankie urgently, and he had been informed that Frankie might be hiding in Burton's karate dojo, as Frankie had stayed there for several years. Miles then instructed Winston to enter a room where there were many firearms, products of their illegal business. Miles also told Winston that he and Frankie were comrades during the Vietnam War, and they remained good friends after returning from the battlefield. Additionally, Miles also allowed Frankie to stay with him at Burton's karate dojo and provided him with a job to smuggle firearms, which was still being done by Miles and Lemmy to this day. Miles then revealed to Winston that Frankie often messed up on the job, but they didn't really mind until one day. Frankie didn't show up when they were about to make an illegal weapons purchase transaction. Lemmy added that the situation became chaotic because Frankie didn't show up, and they lost a lot of money and weapons, with Lemmy being severely injured in the incident. After that incident, they never met Frankie again until a buyer informed them that Frankie had been working at a hotel, which turned out to be the Continental. After receiving information from Miles and Lemmy that Frankie was often in Alphabet City, Winston decided to go there, and before leaving, he asked for his pistol back, which had been confiscated by Miles unexpectedly. Miles also gave Winston a large rifle as an addition, and Winston seemed pleased because that day he was given many weapons for free, just because he said he was looking for Frankie. At the same time, in an abandoned building, Razzo was being brutally beaten by a muscular man named Bob from the adjudicator's order because Razzo was involved in the theft carried out by Frankie. Although Razzo admitted that he had been framed by Frankie, who chose to escape with the gold coin printer and left him to be captured by Cormick's henchmen, the adjudicator believed that Razzo had conspired with Frankie to steal the gold coin printer, which was also a valuable artifact belonging to the High Table, with the value of which could destabilize an organization since before the era of ancient Roman Empire. After giving out the information to Razzo, the adjudicator ordered Bob to kill Razzo, while she commented that they didn't need to do anything to Cormick because his time in power would soon come to an end. The following day, Katie decided to go to the Continental, and after she entered the hotel, she found that all the hotel staff were armed behind their clothes. Katie then went to the bar to order scotch, and the bartender seemed surprised because Katie paid with regular paper money, but he chose to take the money when a guest signaled to him. After finishing her drink, Katie saw a man ordering a drink at the bar and paying with a gold coin she had never seen before. Katie then went to the reception desk to book a room, but she was recommended to go to another hotel because all the rooms in that hotel were full. On the other hand, Winston, who was on his way to Alphabet City, suddenly decided to return, as if he remembered something important. Shortly afterward, Winston arrived at an abandoned movie theater and found someone sitting in the front row of the theater. Winston thought that person was Frankie, but as he approached the person, he found that it was not a real person sitting there, but a mannequin. At the same time, Winston's neck was tied with a rope thrown from above, and Yin suddenly appeared to kill Winston by strangling him. At the same time, Frankie appeared and immediately recognized Winston, so he promptly cut the rope to save Winston. Yin looked angry when Frankie freed Winston because she just found out that Frankie actually had a younger brother. Frankie then searched Winston and asked for his reason for coming to find him, since they had severed ties long ago when Winston moved to London. Winston then told Frankie that Cormick had sent his men to kidnap him in London and bring him back to the United States. Knowing that Cormick would surely kill Frankie, Winston decided to find Frankie first before Cormick's henchmen could find him. Winston tried to convince Frankie that he would find a way for Frankie and Yin to escape from Cormick, but Frankie replied that Cormick was a dangerous man who worked for people much more dangerous than him. Frankie added that Cormick was part of a criminal organization whose power far exceeded the Continental, their city, or even their country. He revealed that a group called the Nile promised him a way out if he stole the gold coin printer for them. In addition, they also promised to give him a lot of money to start a new life, or enough for them to hide from Cormick. But unexpectedly, he was deceived by them, and now he still had to hide from Cormick and his superiors who had many spies everywhere. Upon learning that, Winston tried to convince Frankie to leave with him because now he had a lot of money, and he could buy freedom or an escape route for them. At the same time, Cormick's henchmen arrived at the building and immediately launched an attack with a bazooka to break through the building's entrance. Hearing the explosion, Winston suggested they flee from there immediately because they would have difficulty fighting Cormick's armed henchmen. However, Yin refused to leave and locked herself in the room because she considered the place their home. From behind the door, Frankie tried to persuade her by saying that home could be anywhere, as long as they stayed together as a family. Hearing that, Yin seemed to ponder Frankie's words for a moment before deciding to flee with Frankie and Winston. On the other hand, Cormick's henchmen found that they had entered the wrong building because they didn't find anyone there, as Winston apparently anticipated being followed by them. So he had devised a plan to divert their attention. After successfully escaping from Cormick's henchmen, Frankie asked Winston about their next destination, and Winston told him that he would take them to Charlie's place. Frankie then asked why Winston saved him, and Winston simply replied that Frankie was the only family he had, and he didn't want to lose him. Upon hearing that, Frankie informed Winston that Yin was his wife, indicating that Yin was also their family, although Yin still seemed inclined to kill Winston for bringing Cormick's henchmen to them. At night, they finally arrived at Charlie's place, and Charlie looked so relieved to see his beloved car still intact. However, Yin still seemed skeptical of Winston because she chose to ensure that Cormick's henchmen were not following them, instead of entering the house. Meanwhile, Katie, who was taking a shower, suddenly heard something that made her quickly end her shower and grab her pistol. As she exited the bathroom, Katie found no one there, but she realized that someone had placed something on the table. Katie approached the table and found Frankie's criminal records placed by Mayhew on the table. Katie then examined the criminal records and found that Frankie was currently declared missing. Katie instantly became frustrated because she failed to find any clues about Frankie, even though she was confident that Frankie was involved in the firearms smuggling syndicate. At the same time, Winston and Frankie engaged in a heated debate because Winston thought Frankie was avoiding him because he hated him. But surprisingly, Frankie revealed that he was avoiding Winston to protect him so that Winston could live life on his own and to keep him alive. After learning the truth, Winston was suddenly silent because he never expected Frankie to care so much about him, even willing to involve himself in the criminal world to keep him away from those who had destroyed their family. While Winston and Frankie were talking to clear up the misunderstandings between them, an acquaintance of Charlie's named Cal seemed to be making a phone call to report Winston and Frankie's whereabouts at Charlie's house to Cormick. Shortly after, as they were about to leave Charlie's house, Cal suddenly appeared behind them, intending to kill them. Fortunately, Yin, who was on guard, immediately realized it, so she promptly killed Cal and told Winston and Frankie that Cal was a traitor. At the same time, Cormick's henchmen arrived at the place, so they hurriedly fled from there. In an attempt to escape from Cormick's henchmen, they tried to resist, although eventually Winston, who was driving, lost control when their car's tire was shot. Their car crashed into a fire hydrant and overturned, but fortunately, they managed to escape before Cormick's henchmen arrived. Winston then took the injured Frankie to hide in an apartment building, but Cormick's henchmen managed to find their whereabouts. While Winston and Frankie were engaged in a fierce fight against Cormick's henchmen, Yin entered an apartment where a baby was awake due to the noise of the ongoing fight outside. Unfortunately, one of Cormick's henchmen found Yin, and they immediately engaged in a fight, causing the apartment to become a mess. After a fierce battle, Yin finally managed to kill the man, as did Frankie, who defeated Cormick's henchmen despite being injured. But unexpectedly, one of Cormick's henchmen survived and aimed a gun at Frankie, ordering him to hand over the ancient coin press. The man then mocked Winston for the small pistol he pointed at him, but surprisingly, Frankie let the man shoot his arm, then took Winston's pistol to kill him and also surviving the attack. Shortly after, Winston and the others hurriedly went to the rooftop of the building to escape using a helicopter prepared by Charlie and his acquaintance, Ronnie. But unexpectedly, Cormick had sent two hitmen known as the Twins to kill them. The twins, who skilled in long-range shooting, managed to incapacitate Yin and Ronnie. Upon seeing that, Frankie decided to protect his family by surrendering to Cormick. After instructing Yin and Winston to take care of each other, Frankie then jumped from the helicopter carrying a safe containing the ancient gold coin press he had stolen. But the twins then shot Frankie dead, while Yin and Winston could only watch Frankie's death from a distance, and they appeared devastated because Frankie chose to sacrifice himself to protect them. After Frankie's death, Winston decided to take Yin to Lou and Miles for help, while Cormick appeared furious upon learning that the contents of the safe were not the stolen gold coin press, but a statue deliberately placed by Frankie to deceive him. The scene then shifts to the past to 1955, when Frankie and Winston attempted to burn down a building to anger Cormick. But unexpectedly, they found that there were still people inside the building they set on fire, even though the building was supposed to be empty at night. Upon learning this, Winston was immediately feeling guilty and telling his brother that they should have saved the people inside. However, Frankie urged Winston to flee immediately because they would be caught if they stayed there any longer. Several years later, in 1970, Yin, who was still in Vietnam at the time, appeared to be prepared by her husband, Nam, to carry out a mission that could cost her life. Yin thought Nam intended to punish her because she could not bear him a son, but Nam told her that Yin was never destined to be a mother, as she was an assassin. Shortly after, Yin, whose body was fitted with a bomb, headed to a bar frequented by U.S. soldiers, where Nam ordered her to detonate the bomb there. But when Yin pressed the trigger, there was no explosion at all, indicating that her mission had failed. However, Yin felt relieved because the bomb did not detonate, and that's when she first met Frankie, who looked at her from across the table. Frankie then smiled at Yin, and she awkwardly returned the smile. In the present, Winston is seen smoking as Miles gives him Frankie's belongings they found while searching the body. Winston then gazes at Frankie for a moment for the last time before Frankie's body is cremated. Winston tries to hold back his tears as he watches Frankie's body being cremated, but he cannot hide the deep sadness and grief over Frankie's death, who was his only family. Meanwhile, Lou, who was caring for the injured Yin in her dojo, suddenly startled by two men who place a cigarette machine in her dojo without asking for permission first. Lou immediately tells them to move the cigarette machine because she does not want it in her dojo, but they ignore her, so Lou proceeds to beat them up. At the same time, a man known as the Orphan Master approaches Lou and praises her fighting skills because she managed to beat up two men without much effort. Lou then tells the Orphan Master that her father and Chun had agreed not to interfere with each other's business, so she refuses to have the cigarette machine in the Burton Karate Dojo. However, the Orphan Master tells Lou that Chun has left, and now he is the new ruler in Chinatown. He also informs Lou that he has a new rule requiring every business in Chinatown to have a cigarette machine, so Lou must comply with the rule if she still wants to do business in Chinatown. On the other hand, Katie appears annoyed when Mayhew visits her while bringing pizza and beer, as Mayhew always thinks about sleeping with her instead of helping her find Frankie. Mayhew argues that Katie's investigation into Frankie will not yield results because Frankie has been declared missing. But Katie emphasizes to Mayhew that Frankie is involved in an illegal firearms smuggling syndicate. To divert Katie's attention from Frankie, Mayhew tries to seduce her by kissing her, but at the same time, Katie receives a phone call informing her that Frankie has passed away. Meanwhile, on the way home with Frankie's ashes, Miles informs Winston that Cormick failed to retrieve the stolen gold coin press because Frankie had hidden it somewhere. Upon learning that, Winston comments that Frankie must have devised a plan before sacrificing his life to save them. Shortly afterward, Winston decides to seek revenge on Cormick for Frankie's death, and to execute this revenge plan, he tells Miles and the others that he needs their help. Hearing this, Miles responds that Cormick and his men are on a completely different level from them, so it's impossible for them to kill Cormick. However, they have no choice but to resist because Cormick will surely come to kill everyone who has ever been associated with Frankie, including the three of them. Lemmy comments that they should return the gold coin press to Cormick and end it all, but Winston reveals that he has no idea where Frankie hid the object. And he also doesn't know about Frankie's plan. Not only Winston intends to kill Cormick, but he also plans to take over the Continental and everything that comes with it, including control over firearms smuggling. Upon hearing that, Miles becomes interested in helping Winston kill Cormick, especially when Winston confidently tells them that he has a lot of money. Winston also adds that he knows Cormick very well, so he can anticipate his moves, his way of thinking, and also his way of manipulating others. In the midst of their conversation, Yin suddenly appears and angrily asks about Frankie's whereabouts. When she learns that Winston had cremated Frankie's body without her knowledge, Yin becomes furious and intends to attack Winston. Miles and the others try to stop her, but she easily overpowers them and knocks down Winston. Winston tries to explain everything to Yin, but Yin refuses to listen to any explanation from him, so Winston is forced to press on Yin's unhealed wound because she tried to kill him. Yin reluctantly releases Winston and then rushes away from them, ignoring Winston, who is trying to apologize to her. After Yin leaves, Miles comments that they will need Yin's help if they want to kill Cormick and take over the Continental. At the same time, after hearing about Frankie's death, Katie then goes to the morgue to identify Frankie's body, but upon arrival, she finds that Frankie's body has been taken by someone mysteriously because the coroner's assistant named Ezra, who was on duty at the time, claims that he has no idea about Frankie's body. Knowing that Ezra has lied, Katie then interrogates him violently to make Ezra tell the truth, until Ezra eventually reveals that Frankie's body was taken by two people who offered him a lot of money because they intended to cremate him. Ezra also tells Katie that one of them is Frankie's brother because they resemble each other, but he doesn't know his name. Katie then begins to intimidate Ezra to reveal more information, until she finally learns that they drive a green VW and live in Chinatown. In the Continental, Cormick, who is enjoying lunch, is suddenly approached by the adjudicator and her bodyguard, who openly taunt Cormick because he can still enjoy various delicious dishes comfortably, even though he should be in a panic because the gold coin press has still not been found until now. The adjudicator then removes her mask and tastes one of Cormick's dishes, while Cormick and Sharon look at her uncomfortably after she revealing her mouth, which looks much more menacing. The adjudicator then puts her mask back on and informs Cormick that the high table has given him 3 days to find the missing gold coin press and bring the people involved in the theft before them. If he fails, the high table will freeze Cormick's position at the Continental until they find someone suitable to replace his position as the manager of the Continental. On the other hand, Winston and the others appear to be thinking of ways to attack the Continental and preparing the weapons they will need to fight Cormick's henchmen. At that moment, Winston asks Miles if he knows anyone who is a Vietnam War veteran like him and Frankie, but Miles immediately replies that most of them have either joined Cormick or chosen to start a new peaceful life. Miles then remembers Jenkins and thinks that Jenkins might be willing to help them, although Lou doubts it because Jenkins is an old man who was a longtime friend of their father. Meanwhile, Lemmy informs them about Maisie, a gang leader who operates in Bowery, and she also despises Cormick. Upon hearing that, Winston intends to form an alliance with Maisie, but Lou warns him that Maisie and her group never play by the rules, and they always reject allies from outside Bowery. Nevertheless, Winston still wants to try to meet Maisie and ask them to tell him her location. At the same time, on the rooftop of a building, Jenkins is seen preparing his sniper rifle to kill his target, a man named Frank who is trying to persuade a young boy to go with him by promising the boy a piece of bread. But the boy refuses Frank's invitation and immediately walks away from Frank. Upon seeing that, Jenkins immediately fired a shot towards Frank, but his first shot missed due to his deteriorating eyesight as a result of old age. Nevertheless, Jenkins eventually managed to shoot Frank dead, then crossed out Frank's photo on the file, which stated that Frank was a fugitive wanted for cases of sexual misconduct involving underage boys aged 12 and below. When he returned to his apartment, Jenkins found Miles waiting for him to recruit him into their team. Surprisingly, Jenkins already knew that Miles intended to recruit him for a mission to kill Cormick and take over the Continental. Although Miles had warned him that the mission might be dangerous, Jenkins immediately agreed to help them because he understood the Continental in detail more than they did. While Miles didn't need to work hard to convince Jenkins, Winston seemed to be facing a less favorable situation as he was immediately threatened at gunpoint upon entering Maisie's place. On the other hand, the twins and Cormick's henchmen appeared to visit Charlie's place, conducting a search to find the missing gold coin press. As they searched the entire place and dismantled Charlie's car, Ronnie seemed to be hiding in a secret underground room, hoping they wouldn't find him. Meanwhile, Yin returned to the old cinema building that had once been a temporary home for her and Frankie, as well as a hiding place that should not be known to anyone. At the same time, Yin saw Cormick's henchmen entering the cinema building to search for the missing gold coin press, but with her fighting skills, Yin could easily killing them. On the other hand, Winston finally got the chance to negotiate with Maisie, who turned out to have known about Frankie's death and also the missing gold coin press. Winston tried to persuade Maisie by offering a lot of money, but Maisie replied that she came from a wealthy family so she didn't need his money. Shortly afterward, one of Maisie's henchmen approached her to inform her that Cormick's henchmen had found out Winston's whereabouts at the place. Fortunately, they acted quickly by killing all of Cormick's henchmen, but Maisie then told Winston to leave the place immediately, without giving him an answer as to whether she agreed to work with him or not. Maisie then instructed one of her henchmen to take Winston out through the secret underground exit where Maisie's henchmen were training their fighting skills and preparing weapons to fight anyone, threatening their safety. Meanwhile, Cormick gathered the twins and other mercenaries in the church and instructed them to find the gold coin press. At the same time, Winston appeared to visit Charlie's place, which was in disarray due to Cormick's henchmen. When Winston was about to enter the trailer where Charlie lived, he was surprised by Ronnie pointing a gun at him because he thought Winston was one of Cormick's henchmen. Winston then asked Ronnie about Charlie's whereabouts, but Ronnie didn't know either, as he hadn't seen Charlie since he helped Winston and Yin escape by helicopter. Winston then told Ronnie that he was forming a team to take down Cormick and the Continental, and Ronnie said he was willing to join the team to help Winston. On the other side, Lou, who refused to use firearms, was seen teaching Lemmy how to throw axes so that Lemmy wouldn't rely too much on firearms in combat. Lou then asked Lemmy why he was helping Winston, even though Lemmy didn't like Frankie. Lemmy replied that he was helping them because he cared for Miles, who was his best friend. While Lemmy and Lou were practicing throwing axes, Miles was seen discussing with Winston and Jenkins to devise their revenge plan. Shortly after, Yin approached them to give a blueprint of the Continental made by Frankie so they could more easily infiltrate the hotel. Seeing Yin handing over the blueprint to them, Miles assumed that Yin had agreed to help them, but Yin seemed still annoyed at Winston. Although they had obtained the blueprint, Winston argued that they still needed help from an insider. However, Jenkins replied that it was impossible for them to get help from an insider because Cormick's henchmen and the hotel staff were very loyal to Cormick. After discussing with Winston and Jenkins, Miles then persuaded Yin to get another larger vehicle, as the green VW bus they were using was too cramped. Instead of buying a new vehicle, Miles and Yin ended up stealing a truck, and unfortunately, they were caught by a security guard. While Miles and Yin were stealing the truck, Winston and Jenkins were seen observing Sharon relaxing on the rooftop of the Continental building with his friend, Kane. At that moment, Winston suggested to Jenkins that he intended to recruit Sharon into their team. But Jenkins seemed doubtful that Sharon would be willing to help them because Sharon had been trained for a long time by Cormick and was very loyal to Cormick. On the other hand, Kane informed Sharon that he would soon leave because he had been accepted to a music academy in Ireland. Kane then invited Sharon to join him, but Sharon refused because Cormick had promised him that he would bring his father to the United States if Sharon could prove himself, which would be accomplished shortly. Meanwhile, Katie visited Mayhew at his apartment to ask him to help her finding the green VW bus in Chinatown without an official search warrant from the police. Initially, Mayhew refused to help Katie because the clue was related to Frankie, but he eventually agreed to help Katie after she threatened to reveal their affair to his wife. In the following days, Sharon went to the post office to pick up a letter from his father, then stopped by his friend Jamal's record store. When Jamal was about to show something to Sharon, Lou, who had been spying on Sharon from the beginning in the store, took the letter from Karen's father and gave it to Winston, who was waiting for her in the car. When Lou was about to go home, she found a boy deliberately breaking the window of her dojo, so she immediately chased after him until she finally arrived at the orphan master's place. Knowing that the orphan master was behind all this, Lou demanded that he clean up the broken glass in her dojo, but the orphan master instead ordered his men to beat up Lou. One of them pushed Lou until her head hit the car, but soon after that, Lou fought back and easily defeated them. Upon seeing that, the orphan master then invited Lou into his restaurant, where he urged Lou to change the name of her dojo to Kwon, which is a Chinese term, because dojo is Japanese. However, Lou firmly refused, emphasizing to the orphan master that the dojo was her father's pride, earned after he defeated his opponents and acquired with honor. Upon hearing that, the orphan master commented that there were many things about her father that Lou didn't know. Frustrated, Lou then chose to leave the place, and when she arrived at her dojo, she confronted Jenkins about the fact that he had once rented a room at the Continental, indicating that Jenkins had some involvement with the powerful figures behind the Continental. However, Jenkins refused to explain anything to Lou and told her to ask Miles if she wanted to know. Shortly afterward, Sharon, who was about to go home by bus, was suddenly surprised by the appearance of Lou, who bribed the bus driver and ordered the other passengers to get off. At the same time, Sharon saw Winston boarding the bus and tried to persuade Sharon to side with him, recounting the bad things Cormick had done to him and Frankie. Winston also told Sharon that Cormick only cared about himself and ultimately wouldn't allow Sharon to carve out his own path so he could always control him. Upon hearing that, Sharon began to doubt Cormick because he had also experienced all the things Winston described when he still worked for Cormick. In the Continental, Cormick revealed to Kane that he was the one who had called the music academy in Ireland to accept Kane as a student there so that Kane could leave and stay away from Sharon. However, Kane instead tried to persuade Sharon to go with him to Ireland and leave the Continental. Kane replied that Sharon rejected his offer because Sharon was loyal to Cormick and Sharon believed that his future was to remain at the Continental with Cormick. Upon knowing that, Cormick became angry with Kane for trying to persuade Sharon to leave him. Cormick then ordered Kane to play his cello, but shortly afterward, he took a golf club and beat him to death. Upon arriving at the hotel, Sharon appeared shocked to find that Kane was dead, and Cormick revealed that he had beaten Kane to death because he was angry when he found out that Kane had persuaded Sharon to leave him. Cormick intended to replace Kane with Karen's father, who was also a musician, but surprisingly, Sharon informed Cormick that Winston was forming a team to kill him and he had been asked to join them. However, Sharon told Cormick that he refused to join because he wanted to prove to Cormick that he was worthy of advancing in his loyalty to Cormick. Upon hearing that, Cormick felt proud of Sharon because he chose to remain by his side instead of siding with Winston. In the following days, Winston and his team were seen training before they executed their plan to attack the Continental. Winston intended to steal the armory keys at the Continental to prepare themselves and Maisie's henchmen. Hearing this, Miles then asked Winston if Maisie had agreed to help them, and Winston confidently told them that Maisie would help them, even though in reality, Maisie had not given any answer to that offer. Although they agreed to help Winston, they still doubted the plan because the Continental was a hotel for highly trained mercenaries, and the hotel staff had also been armed by Cormick to anticipate unexpected attacks. Not only that, they also doubted whether Sharon would be willing to help them because Sharon was very loyal to Cormick. Upon hearing that, Winston became angry and told them that they could withdraw from the mission because he would still kill Cormick and take over the Continental with or without them. The following day, someone was seen spying on Lou and Lemmy as they brought wooden crates containing explosives into the dojo. Soon after that, Katie entered the dojo and asked them about Winston. Lou and Lemmy admitted that they didn't know Winston, but surprisingly, Katie told them that she knew all three of them as a firearms smuggling syndicate, and she didn't actually mind it at all because she just wanted to meet with Winston. Since she didn't get any information about Winston, Katie then gave her business card to Lou and told her to call her if she knew anything about Winston. After that, Katie then left the dojo, and she also seemed to be spied on by someone who turned out to be Mayhew. On the other hand, Jenkins disguised himself as a pest control officer so he could enter the apartment of a woman named Patricia, whose location was right across from the Continental. At that moment, Jenkins tried to convince Patricia that there were many rats in her apartment, so he asked Patricia to stay elsewhere while he would exterminate the rats. While Miles and the others discussed the mission they were going to undertake to take over the Continental, Lou appeared to be contemplating alone while mourning her father's death. Shortly after, Miles approached Lou and told her to buy ammunition because their supplies were running low, but Lou instead confronted Miles about Jenkins's past. who once rented a room at the Continental. Lou asked if their father knew about it, but Miles said he also didn't know if their father knew about Jenkins's past. In the evening, the twins boarded the bus previously used by Winston to trap Sharon so he could speak with him privately. At that moment, one of the twins, Gretel, then attacked the bus driver, Ted, while her twin brother, Hansel, prepared a rifle to kill Ted. Sharon then asked Ted about Winston, and Ted reluctantly told them that Winston got off at the Hotel Rhodes after meeting Sharon personally on the bus. After getting this information, the twins then killed Ted, while Sharon could only watch the event. In the evening, Winston met with Maisie in an abandoned building. Winston then recounted about his past to Maisie in an attempt to persuade her to help him. To impress Maisie even more, Winston even went as far as to buy the abandoned building as a gift for Maisie, and he had also prepared suits and weapons for Maisie's henchmen, as he felt confident that Maisie would assist him. On the other hand, Lou, who was about to go meet Winston at the Hotel Rhodes, then called the hotel and left an emergency message for Winston mentioning that she had been followed by someone while on her way to the hotel. At the same time, Mayhew suddenly appeared and attacked Lou, leading them into a fierce fight in the cramped space. However, with her fighting skills, Lou eventually managed to defeat Mayhew and hurriedly left the place. Meanwhile, Winston, who had just arrived at the hotel, was informed that he had received an emergency message from Lou. Shortly afterward, Lou arrived at the hotel and confronted Winston about the female police officer who had been looking for him in Chinatown some time ago. Not only that, Lou also informed Winston that she had been attacked by a police officer while she was on her way to the hotel, but Winston had no idea why the police were after him. In the Continental, Sharon informed Cormick that they had found Winston, who was currently hiding at the Hotel Rhodes. Upon hearing that, Cormick then ordered Sharon to send the hitmen to that hotel. Cormick vowed to find the missing gold coin printer before the deadline set by the adjudicator, because he refused to let them replace him as the manager of the Continental that he had been running for decades. On the other hand, Katie appeared surprised when Mayhew came to her with a battered face. Mayhew told her that he had been in a fight with Lou while revealing that he had been spying on her to protect her. Mayhew also disclosed that he had searched Katie's belongings and knew the reasons why Katie was looking for Frankie and Winston. Upon hearing this, Katie became furious because Mayhew was interfering too much in her personal life. Angrily, Katie then struck Mayhew and ordered him out of her car. Meanwhile, Winston and Lou, who were inside the room, were suddenly ambushed by Hansel and his partner when they were in the room. While Winston tried to evade attacks from his opponent, Lou engaged in a fierce fight against Hansel, who surprisingly had great fighting skills besides his sharpshooting abilities. At the same time, despite lacking fighting skills like Lou, Winston managed to injure his opponent with a knife and hurriedly fled from there. As he was about to leave the hotel, Winston encountered Katie, who then aimed a gun at him. However, Hansel's partner appeared, and they engaged in a shootout until Katie managed to kill him, although in the process, she also got shot and collapsed unconscious. Seeing Katie unconscious, Winston tried to check her condition to find out if she was still alive. Unexpectedly, Hansel suddenly appeared behind him, then struck Winston and took him to a car. Shortly after, Winston was taken away by Hansel, while Mayhew arrived at the Hotel Rhodes and found Katie injured. Katie told Mayhew that she had almost captured Winston, but a man suddenly appeared and shot her. Fortunately, Katie managed to resist and kill the man, so she approached him and found a gold coin in the man's jacket pocket, indicating that he was one of the guests at the Continental. Knowing that Katie intended to find out about the Continental, Mayhew tried to warn Katie by telling her that she would never return to her normal life if she went to the Continental with the gold coin. However, Katie was determined to apprehend Winston, even if she had to risk her life. So she handed her police badge to Mayhew as a sign that she had decided to leave her normal life to pursue her purposes. Shortly after, Katie went to the Continental and told the receptionist that she wanted to rent a room in the hotel while handing a gold coin to the receptionist. Upon realizing that Katie had a gold coin like the other guests, the receptionist then gave her a room key. Meanwhile, Miles and the others were seen checking communication devices and weapons they would use during the mission. Shortly after, Lou arrived and informed them that Winston had been captured by Cormick's henchmen and taken to the Continental, which was part of Winston's plan. In the Continental, Cormick questioned Winston about the whereabouts of the stolen gold coin printer, but Winston refused to disclose anything to him. So Cormick ordered Sharon to open the balcony door. Cormick then threatened to throw Winston off the hotel balcony if he remained silent, but unexpectedly, two of Cormick's henchmen were shot dead by Jenkins from across the building, causing Cormick to rush into his office for cover. Cormick then tried to activate the alarm, but it remained inactive even after he pressed the button several times. Cormick then intended to retrieve his weapon, but surprisingly, Sharon had already taken the weapon and aimed it at Cormick. Upon seeing this, Cormick appeared disappointed because Sharon had betrayed him by assisting Winston. Sharon then ordered Cormick to hand over the weapon warehouse key to him, while Winston instructed Sharon to shoot Cormick immediately. However, Sharon lacked the courage to shoot Cormick, so Cormick managed to escape and lock them in the room. At the same time, Miles and Yin managed to infiltrate the Continental by killing the receptionist, while Lemmy sneaked in through the rooftop and killed Cormick's henchmen who were guarding there. As Miles and the others were executing their plan, Lou, who was at the dojo, was suddenly approached by a boy named Waco, who was one of the Orphan Master's henchmen. Waco came to warn Lou that the Orphan Master and his henchmen would come to her dojo. Shortly after, the Orphan Master arrived there and told Lou that her father was not as good as she had thought. He revealed that Lou's father had once killed the original family who owned the dojo and worked for the most powerful people in the criminal world. Furthermore, the Orphan Master also informed Lou that her father was known as a hitman while showing her a pistol engraved with her father's name. After revealing the truth about Lou's father, the Orphan Master then ordered his henchmen to destroy the dojo. In the Continental, Cormick managed to find an escape route by breaking through the wall, then activating the red alarm code indicating that an attack had occurred at the Continental. Upon hearing the red alarm being activated, the guests and all hotel staff hurriedly prepared themselves and took up their weapons as they had been given permission to engage in killings within the hotel. They had also received information about their targets, who were Winston and Sharon. On the other hand, Winston, who was being treated by Sharon in a room, also heard the alarm, and he ordered Miles and the others to carry out their mission as planned. Even though Sharon had warned him that Cormick might have formed a team and opened the weapon warehouse to arm the hired killers. Meanwhile, Katie, who was about to execute her own plan, was suddenly attacked by two men who knew that she was a police officer. However, Katie managed to defeat the two men by beating them while informing them that she was now a former police officer. On the other hand, Lemmy managed to kill several of Cormick's henchmen as he made his way to the basement floor, but upon arrival there, he encountered a woman who seemed to work as a hotel administrative staff. Thinking that the woman posed no threat, Lemmy put down his weapon, but unexpectedly, the woman suddenly attacked him with a paper cutter. Lemmy quickly grabbed his knife and engaged in a fierce fight with the woman, until Lemmy finally managed to kill her with an axe, although in the process, Lemmy collapsed unconscious because at the same time, the woman threw a heavy object towards him and hitting his head. At the same time, Winston and Sharon hurried to the weapon warehouse, where Miles appeared to be in trouble as he had to face Cormick's henchmen alone. Fortunately, Jenkins, who was stationed as a sniper in the building opposite, noticed that Miles was in trouble and managed to save him just in time. Miles then asked Ronnie about the whereabouts of Yen and Lemmy, but Ronnie informed him that he had not yet gained access to the Continental security system, so he could not access the surveillance cameras inside the hotel. Soon after that, Winston and Sharon managed to reach the weapon warehouse, but their arrival had been anticipated by Cormick and his henchmen who were guarding the place. They immediately threatened Winston and Sharon with their gun and proceeded to search them. Cormick then belittled Winston for devising a foolish plan to attack him and the Continental, which was no match for him. He also underestimated Sharon by mocking his fondness for Kane, as that was what caused Sharon to betray him. However, Sharon replied that he had no regrets betraying Cormick because he had realized that Cormick would always control him if he didn't resist. Angry with Cormick, Winston then sent a signal to initiate the next plan. Surprisingly, some of Cormick's henchmen who had been pointing guns at Winston and Sharon suddenly turned against Cormick because they were actually Maisie's henchmen in disguise. With the situation now in his favor, Winston ordered Cormick to open the weapon warehouse, but unexpectedly, Cormick instead broke the key to the warehouse and turned off the lights, ordering his men to kill Winston and the others. At that moment, gunfire erupted in the darkness, until Sharon finally managed to turn on the lights and found Cormick's and Maisie's henchmen dead. Fortunately, Winston managed to survive by taking cover under one of their bodies, while Cormick had fled from Tcharit. At the same time, Lou deliberately allowed the orphan master and his men to enter to destroy her dojo because she had actually prepared a bomb to demolish the place. Although she appeared deeply saddened and distraught because the dojo was a legacy from her father, Lou had resolved to bury the memories of her father. On the other hand, Jenkins was surprised by the appearance of Patricia, who entered her apartment. Jenkins had actually told Patricia to return to her apartment on Wednesday, but Patricia realized that her medicines were left behind, so she came to retrieve them. Although Patricia posed no threat, Jenkins didn't want to take any risks, so he proceeded to tie Patricia's hands and feet and gag her mouth to prevent her from causing any disturbance. Meanwhile, Winston and Sharon found the elevator operator severely injured from Cormick's attack. Sharon then questioned him about Cormick, and he only mentioned the number 13 in response. At the same time, Katie appeared and immediately pointed her gun at Winston's head. After instructing Sharon to leave, Katie then took Winston to her room and revealed to him that she was the daughter of a family trapped in the fire incident caused by Frankie and Winston several years ago. Upon hearing this, Winston immediately apologized to Katie, but Katie was determined to seek revenge on him by burning him alive. Katie then lit a lighter, but before she could set fire to Winston, Jenkins had already shot her. Witnessing this, Winston rushed to help Katie and signaled Jenkins not to kill her. After helping Katie, Winston then hurried to find Sharon, but he accidentally confronted one of the tough hired killers who was resilient to bullets, especially since Winston had run out of ammunition. Fortunately, Sharon appeared to save Winston and take him to his room. Upon arrival, Sharon revealed to Winston that he was willing to help him because he considered Frankie as his own brother. Sharon explained that Frankie was the only person at the Continental who always cared for him and treated him like his own brother. So he felt deeply saddened when he learned that Frankie was killed on Cormick's orders. Sharon also added that Frankie had even prepared an escape route for Sharon to leave Cormick and the Continental by providing him with many weapons. Upon learning this, Winston appeared proud of Sharon, and he became more determined to kill Cormick and take over the Continental to avenge Frankie's death. At the same time, Cormick arrived at the operational room located on the 13th floor and announced that he would reward $2 million to anyone who successfully killed Winston, and $1 million for killing his accomplices. While Winston and Sharon went to search for Cormick in the operational room, Miles appeared to be quite overwhelmed by Cormick's henchmen who seemed to keep coming endlessly. On the other hand, the twins seemed to have no trouble at all killing Maisie's henchmen who tried to block them until Yin suddenly appeared in front of them and instructed them to follow her. They then arrived in a room where Yin managed to corner them by pointing a gun at Gretel and ordered them to drop their weapons on the floor. Unexpectedly, Yin had actually strapped a bomb to her body and intended to detonate it to kill the twins in revenge for Frankie's death. But shortly afterward, Miles arrived and tried to persuade Yin to abandon her plan. Seeing Yin slightly lose focus because of Miles' words, Hansel took advantage of it to grab his weapon, and Gretel attacked Yin. Hansel then started attacking Miles, while Gretel chased Yin, who hastily fled upon realizing that the situation was not in her favor. At that moment, Miles tried to evade Hansel's and Cormick's henchmen's attacks, but he ended up trapped at the bar and began to run out of ammunition. Fortunately, at the same time, Lemmy regained consciousness from his unconscious and received news that Miles was in trouble. So he sent explosives through the mail tube directly to Miles' current location. However, Hansel managed to avoid the bomb just before it exploded. Nonetheless, the explosion enabled Ronnie to gain access to all the surveillance cameras installed in the hotel, allowing him to monitor their movements. At the same time, Ronnie was surprised by Lou's arrival, who instructed him to guard Waco and store her father's weapons while she would assist Miles and the others. Knowing that the bomb came from the basement floor, Hansel then took a grenade and sent it through the mail tube to kill Lemmy. Upon seeing this, Miles tried to warn Lemmy through their communication device, but Lemmy couldn't hear his voice due to signal interference, so he couldn't avoid the grenade that exploded right in front of him. Furious, Miles rose and tried to fight Hansel even though he had run out of bullets. He engaged in a fierce battle against Hansel, but Hansel easily cornered Miles until Lou suddenly appeared and attacked Hansel. With their karate skills, Miles and Lou then teamed up to fight against Hansel until they managed to bring him down. However, Hansel quickly rose and launched a counterattack that overwhelmed them both. Hansel then broke a pool cue stick and intended to stab Lou, but Miles rushed to save Lou, even though in the process, he ended up being stabbed by Hansel. Upon seeing this, Lou tried to help her brother, but Hansel managed to press her. Surprisingly, Waco had secretly followed Lou, creeping through the air ventilation ducts. So he knew that Lou was in danger and immediately came to her rescue by giving her a pistol belonging to her father. Lou quickly used the pistol to shoot and kill Hansel, then handed the pistol to Miles and asked him to reveal the truth about their father at another time. On the other hand, Winston and Sharon finally arrived in the basement and found Lemmy dying from the grenade explosion. Before taking his last breath, Lemmy informed Winston that he had some other bombs in his bag and instructed Winston to continue his plan without him. With guidance from Ronnie, who was monitoring the situation inside the hotel through the cameras, Winston then sent these bombs to several rooms still occupied by Cormick's henchmen to kill them instantly. Winston intended to send the bombs to the operational room where Cormick currently was, but the mail tube leading to the operational room turned out to be damaged. At the same time, Sharon informed Winston that there was a dumbwaiter lift in the kitchen used by the kitchen staff to send food to the operational room, so they hurriedly went there. Upon arriving in the kitchen, unexpectedly, Sharon was stabbed by one of the henchmen who turned out to be still alive. But Winston immediately killed the man and closed Karen's wound with his scarf to stop the bleeding. On the other hand, Cormick, angered by Winston's and his group's success in killing most of his henchmen, intended to activate the defense protocol with the help of a technician named Orson, who had been working in the operational room. Meanwhile, Yin challenged Gretel to a fight without weapons, so Gretel placed her weapon on the floor, while Yin stripped off the bomb previously attached to her body and threw it into the pool in front of her. Both of them then engaged in a fight, with Yin was momentarily overwhelmed by Gretel, who had a very flexible body. Yin even came close to death when Gretel attempted to stab her, but fortunately, Yin managed to turn the tables and launched a counterattack until they both fell into the pool. At that moment, Gretel reached the surface first and found that the bomb was hanging on her shoulder. But at the same time, Yin had obtained the bomb trigger and immediately pressed the button on the bomb trigger, causing Gretel to die by the explosion from the bomb. Seeing Gretel defeated by Yin, Cormick instantly became furious and then slammed Orson's head onto the table repeatedly until he died. After Orson died, Cormick then activated the defense protocol, which could only be activated with his hand and also Orson's hand simultaneously. With the defense protocol activated, everyone still inside the Continental couldn't leave because all the doors and windows were locked and fitted with iron bars. Additionally, the protocol also activated the self-destruction mode, causing the building to shake due to massive structural deformation. While the Continental began to collapse, Cormick decided to escape through a secret passage so he could safely exit the building even though the defense protocol had closed all exit routes. At the same time, Winston and Sharon arrived in the operational room and found Orson dead. Knowing that the defense protocol had been activated, Sharon then informed Winston that the only way to stop the self-destruction mode was to find Cormick because the key was in Cormick's hands. Realizing that he wouldn't be able to catch Cormick, who was already on the underground railway track, Winston decided to take a shortcut using the garbage disposal chute. However, Winston's arrival at the underground railway track had been anticipated by Cormick, who then attacked him as soon as he arrived there. As they fought each other, Cormick revealed to Winston that he intentionally ordered Frankie and Winston to set fire to a building where a family still lived inside, so that they would have a memory to regret for the rest of their lives. Surprisingly, when Cormick revealed the truth to Winston, Katie was already behind him while pointing a gun. At that moment, Cormick thought Katie was one of the hired assassins interested in the $2 million reward for killing Winston. But Katie then killed Cormick after learning the truth behind the fire incident that had taken the lives of her entire family. After killing Cormick, Katie disposed of her pistol and left Winston behind. At the same time, knowing he only had 3 minutes to stop the destruction of the Continental, Winston began to consider various ways, until he finally came up with an idea when a rescue capsule arrived to evacuate Cormick. Winston hurried to the operational room and managed to halt the Continental's destruction by using Cormick's severed hand. After the defense protocol was cancelled, the self-destruction mode was finally stopped, as were all the doors and windows, which reopened. At the same time, Miles and Lou had successfully defeated Cormick's remaining henchmen, while Jenkins packed his belongings and prepared to leave Patricia's apartment. Before Jenkins left, Patricia told him that she had never been to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden and invited Jenkins to go there with her. Jenkins simply smiled in response to the invitation, but he seemed to accept Patricia's invitation because he liked plants. On the other hand, Winston told Sharon that he was now free to go anywhere he pleased. Winston also urged Sharon to live a normal life, but surprisingly, Sharon said that the Continental would always be his home, and he would not leave anywhere. Sharon also told Winston that he would help Winston manage the Continental. When Miles and the others approached them, Winston poured drinks for them, and they toasted to their success in defeating Cormick and taking over the Continental. They also toasted to Frankie and Lemmy, who lost their lives in their struggle for freedom. Shortly afterward, Winston went outside the hotel and encountered the adjudicator, who stopped all activities at the Continental and placed it under the supervision of the high table temporarily until they found a replacement for Cormick. The adjudicator was quite impressed with Winston's efforts to kill Cormick and take over the Continental, even congratulating Winston on behalf of the high table and asking him how he managed to accomplish it all. The scene then shifted to the past, showing Winston who had successfully found the coin press hidden by Frankie in the trunk of a car. Winston then brought the coin press to Maisie and instructed Maisie's henchmen to mint coins similar to those minted by the high table. After that, Maisie ordered her henchmen to disguise themselves as hired assassins and use the gold coins to rent rooms at the Continental, while she kept the coin press in the safe. Upon learning this, the adjudicator responded that the Continental did not belong to Winston, warning him about the power held by the high table. She also informed Winston that he was nothing compared to Cormick, and even the high table had never heard of him. But Winston seemed unconcerned because the most important thing to him now was that he had taken over the Continental, and he would defend the hotel no matter what. Winston then took his pistol and shot the adjudicator several times to kill her. After killing the adjudicator, Winston aimed his pistol at her bodyguard, but Bob chose not to fight Winston and only carried the adjudicator's body away from the scene. After resolving the issue, Winston returned to the hotel, and in the following days, Winston was seen in his office at the Continental, which used to be Cormick's office. Moral lesson from the story: when a group of people with similar interests come together to work towards the same goal, it's better for them to always wearing a scarf. Because you may never know when unexpected threats that about to happen when entering the dumbwaiter lift.